At 5:19 a.m., my phone buzzed with a cheerful email from an app I'd never heard of, congratulating me on my child finishing a morning bottle. There was a thumbnail photo, half blurred for privacy but clear enough to show a blue and yellow sippy with a silicone straw on a map printed with tiny mountains. The apps had a wee bright wheel and addressed me as Parent Carter Room, Blue Jays. I lay very still, listening to the old bungalow sigh in the dark, and realized the app had used my email because someone had entered it as father. Our Denver house sits in Baker, 2 blocks off South Broadway where the neon signs don't sleep and the bars empty in waves. The layout is the standard railroad shop for the neighborhood: narrow porch, living room opening into a kitchen with at any right angles 2 small bedrooms stacked behind. I ran a salvage and restore business out of the detached garage. I take old windows and doors and make them new enough to pass modern inspections without losing what made them worth saving. My side income comes from a niche e-commerce shop that sells rescued hardware, vintage latches and glass knobs catalogued in label bins like a librarian's private collection. Nora, my wife, is a paramedic with Denver Health EMS. She likes nights. She says city sirens feel like home, and the bright box of the ambulance with its specific chemical smells is where her brain clicks into purpose. Her schedule is printed in a grid that lives on our fridge, but the real schedule is an app called EledTech where shifts appear and vanish like stocks, covered and traded among coworkers. She swaps often. A friend needs to go to a custody hearing, she'll cover. She wants a Saturday. She'll work Wednesday and build goodwill like a savings account. We have never once had a kid's morning bottle to report. 2 years ago we were told, with the quiet precision of medical language, that the odds of a biological child were somewhere between unlikely and not happening. The urologist's office sat behind a hibachi place on South Colorado, which felt like a joke. I lay on butcher paper while a young doctor explained numbers that looked like someone had taken scissors to a ruler and tossed the first inch. We nodded like sensible people and walked back to the car through a parking lot that smelled like onions and propane. Money has been a steady background ache. Fun has quit on the coldest night of last January. We took a promo loan because the antique looked picturesque but had been dying for 3 winters. A hailstorm turned our roof into a checkerboard. The deductible arrived at the same time as a pallet of sash cord I'd ordered for spring work. Nora's student loans have paused unimposed so many times they feel like a traffic light stuck at yellow. There's always a van in my life in some state of needing brakes or refusing to shift out of second. Denver is expensive. I am precise about this because imprecision is a luxury we do not have. I stared at the Brightwell email until the sun began to make a pale outline of the maple outside the window. The subject line turned grotesque. Good morning from Blue Jays. I clicked through. The app congratulated me for linking to Carter B, 23 months, and invited me to upload a family photo. There were 3 previous entries in the log, 2 diaper changes with checkboxes, and a note about an app lasting 41 minutes the past afternoon. There was a small circle beside approved pickup, Nora. I swallowed and tasted old coffee. Nora was supposed to be asleep in the second bedroom, the one we sometimes called the office because it sounded less temporary. Her shoes were by the door. Her jacket hung where it always hung. The charge cord lay on the kitchen counter like a snake. She had texted at 4:06 that a late ride call had extended her night. I tried to stack facts in a way that made sense. I failed. At 7:12 I drove to the address in the email Little Foothills Early Learning on West 2nd Avenue. The parking lot held a tidy row of Subaru wagons and a contractor's F-150 with a magnetic sign for a flooring company. I recognized the magnet because I bid against him on a Cherry Creek remodel in May. There's a small economy of hands in this city. If you work with your hands, you see the same trucks all over town. Inside, the air smelled like baby wipes and Play-Doh. A woman at the desk smiled in the way people who manage long lists of children's names smile, and asked me to sign in on an iPad. I explained that I wanted to correct an error with an email that had been added to her child's profile. She asked the child's name. I stammered something that felt like a paper cut, my own name attached to a possessive I had not earned. She glanced at a screen, then at me, her brightness dimming and then turning professional again like a dimmer switch. She asked for ID. I handed her my license. She glanced at a second monitor, then asked me to wait by the water cooler. The water cooler gurgled in a soothing way that made me want to shatter it. 2 toddlers walked past in a slow rope line, each holding a loop with one chubby hand, the teacher saying something gentle I could not hear. I focused on the painted blue jay above the office door and realized it had been dabbed by several hands because parts were rough, parts smooth. It made me unfairly angry, the way imperfection sometimes does when you're holding yourself together with thin straps. While I waited, my phone vibrated. A second email. A reminder that tuition would auto-draft at 3 p.m. via a card ending in 4 numbers I know too well. The subject line said friendly reminder auto-pay opt-in. I grew very still, the kind of stillness that is a decision and a surrender. The director came out and asked if we could step into her office. I was a stranger until the screen told her otherwise. My name on the profile made me apparent. She said my email was on the account added yesterday. She said Nora's name was listed, too, as parent, with a note that she worked nights and would authorize pickups. She said I could remove my email if that was what I wanted. She said I could change settings. She used the tone people use when someone is telling a story that might unravel if pushed too hard. I told her to remove my email and stole the auto-draft. She said tuition billing would need to be handled manually. She handed me a printed page with the vendor's name and a phone number. The vendor was Bright Wheel Payments. The phone number began with an 888. She asked if there was anything else I needed. I said yes. I asked who had listed me as a parent. She said the system only shows the last person who updated, not who built it. She said the profile was created 6 weeks earlier. I was still there when Nora walked in, hair pulled into a sleeve, scrubs beneath a hoodie with the EMS patch on the shoulder. The room felt too small for my body. She did not see me at first. She saw the director and nodded. The practiced acknowledgement of a woman who has spent a decade at a desk checking in and out. She had a small boy on her hip with dark hair and a collar that bent toward his temple. He held a blue and yellow cup and pressed his face into Nora's neck in the way children do when they have learned that a particular collarbone equals quiet. He lifted his head a second later and stared at me with solemn concentration and then back at his cup. They moved past me into the hallway. Nora stopped. A muscle in her cheek twitched the way a fish flicks when surprised. She said something I could not hear because I was not listening for words so much as for an answer to a question that had no single answer. She put him down and straightened his hoodie. She did not fall apart, not in that moment. The director glanced between us and said the thing people say when they need to control a lobby. She said we could take any complicated conversation outside. I asked the director for a copy of any document bearing my name. She printed a page with the profile image area blank and the parent section filled with my name and Nora's. Under relationship, the word father. Under authorized pickup, my name again. I put the paper in the salvage folder in my bag that usually holds invoices and cut lists. I left without making a scene in a hallway full of children's art. I sat in my van and put my head on the steering wheel for 1 full minute. I did not cry. I breathed in that stuttery way you breathe when your ribcage doubts its purpose. After that, I did the only thing that keeps me from rearranging shelves when the shelf is my life. I called my bank, First Bank on Broadway, asked for the Ford line, and said I needed to freeze the joint card. The woman's voice belonged to someone who has seen similar events in other people's houses. I asked to open a separate checking immediately and to route my incoming payments there. She gave me a case number FBK FRA-90,000. 172 and suggested I place a temporary freeze on my credit with the 3 bureaus. I asked her to do what she could. She told me which links to click. I emailed the daycare vendor and revoked auto-pay. I sent the daycare an email stating I did not consent to be listed as a parent or emergency contact and asking them to remove me from the file, with a copy to the director. I printed that email to paper, because paper has a weight that electrons do not. I wrote the time and date in the corner because my father taught me to mark paper when something matters. By 10:00 a.m., my hands had found something resembling work. I drove to a job off Logan, where a client wanted 3 windows rehabbed before a painter turned the whole house white and called it a refresh. I worked in silence. The scrape of a putty knife, the crunch of old glazing points, the sweet, faint smell of linseed oil under the mineral spirits. My forearms burned, a clean burn that reassured me there are pains you can name. At noon, my neighbor texted. She lives across the alley and sees everything because she plants herself on her back porch and smokes with the kind of commitment that makes you less worried about the rest of her habits. She asked if we had family visiting because she had seen Nora wrestle a car seat into the back of the Subaru the other morning, and she had seen a little boy with a knitted hat shaped like a fox, and she thought it was cute as hell. I wrote back a thank you and then a nothing. I scrolled back through Find My, the feature we both allow because our lives involve dangerous nights and I like knowing when to send safe texts. Nora's location had been not available twice in the last month. She'd said the update had broken again. The LaTeX showed 3 swaps. She had covered the day after the Sunday game and given away a Friday. The lobs appended timestamps. The timestamps lined up with receipts on our card for Co-op Grocery on York and a children's boutique on Pearl whose window I pass on the way to the lumber yard and have never entered. The first hard reveal came by mail. A lease addendum for a micro studio on Spey Boulevard addressed to me, with a reference number and a past due notice for HOA fees. The addendum carried a second name as occupant, Nora. The building name was River Places, one of those polished places with key fobs and an herb garden on the roof for marketing copy. The signature on my line looked like mine with my own hesitation. I've always paused before the L when I'm doing legal documents, the last remnant of a childhood stutter. Someone had learned my pause. I drove to River Places and spoke to the manager, a man with a window desk in the face of someone who has had to ask angry renters to go outside. He told me he could not share information, and then when I slid the notice across the table, he softened into the particular tone of someone who wants out of an encounter as kindly as possible. He confirmed a studio under my name, furnished corporate sublet handled through a company called Flat Key. He said the fob log would show entries and exits if I subpoenaed it. He could tell me the herb garden mint was underused. He smiled like we shared a joke. I did not smile back. In the elevator, my phone buzzed. An email from Associated Bank with the subject "Your HELOC application requires signature." I had not applied for any line of credit. The body of the email attached a PDF. The e-signature looked familiar and wrong at the same time. Associated's number ran me into a convoice, which took my report and gave me a case number ABFR-11763 and asked me to file a notarized affidavit by close of business the next day. I called our insurance company immediately after and asked for a dependent audit because my name had been used recently to add a child to an account in a system that never heard from me. The woman on the phone had the detached empathy that people who talk about damage all day adopt so the words don't stick to them. She issued a case number H or D-32,851 and told me she would forward my letter to compliance. My name felt like a piece of furniture I needed to strap to the wall. I knew I should wait for a calm family scene to present evidence. What I had instead was a union barbecue in the lot behind Nora's EMS station, with families and kids on scooters and someone's uncle manning a grill with the seriousness of a surgeon. It was Sunday afternoon. The mountains had a hazy purple line that makes people who aren't from here go quiet and think about moving. Nora stood in a cluster of medics with their energy drinks, laughing at something I would have laughed at last month. I brought my folder. I reminded myself I wasn't a showman. I wanted witnesses because witnesses make memory behave. I waited until after the raffle for Rocky's tickets. I took Nora aside into the shadow of an ambulance bay and asked if we could talk in front of one person she trusted. She asked her supervisor to stand nearby. I laid out the Brightwell page listing me as father and pickup, the lease addendum, the Associated Bank HELOC email, printouts of their LaTeX swap logs next to our card transactions at the children's boutique and Little Fittles, and the insurance audit case number. I said I had frozen the joint card and opened a separate checking account. I said any new credit would require my written consent. I said I had requested fob logs and would be requesting logs for spare. I said I had asked for a dependent audit. I spoke like a man reading a checklist because checklists are how you land planes. Her supervisor watched me the whole time. He has a face that has seen all varieties of human error and the aftermath of poor choices, and he made a small exhale that I will hear in my head years from now. Nora said I was violating her privacy, that I was turning something she had done to help into an accusation. She said I was humiliating her in front of her station. She said if my masculinity were not so fragile, I would understand that listing me as parent on a childcare account was a placeholder to make a system happy while she figured out whether she could keep a child safe from someone who would hurt him. She said I had always needed paper to tell me how to be. I did not yell. I did not throw the folder. I told her supervisor that I had opened a separate account and frozen the card, that I would be sending written notice requesting that any use of my name on forms cease, and that I would be scheduling a DNA test and paying for it. He nodded once, slow, the nod a man gives to a man making decisions he understands. Later, on the sidewalk by the grill, an EMT named Brain told me quietly that she had covered one of Nora's swaps, and that she had seen Nora wheeling a stroller into the Spear building from the loading dock one morning, and had assumed it was a relative in from out of town. Rain's voice carried no judgment. I wrote it down with the same care as any serial number. After the barbecue, the next twist came when a librarian called me by mistake. The message on my voicemail asked if Mr. Connolly wanted to add a dependent to a library card for access to story time at the Bias branch. She apologized for bothering me and said the forms were in the staff room. I dialed back and told her she had the wrong number. Then I sat in my van and imagined a small boy tapping his card on a broken scanner and laughing, and I felt anger bloom in a pattern I knew was not about him. A neighbour delivered another twist without meaning to. She texted a photo she had taken at the last South Pole Farmers Market. In the background of a shot of peaches and tomatoes, Nora walked by with a little boy on her shoulders wearing a hat with tiny ears, a woman beside her whose face I recognised from a Christmas party 2 years earlier when Nora's station got together at the brewery and Spazzers stood in a nervous cluster and compared apps that pay you $10 to walk dogs. The woman worked nights in billing at the hospital and had once complimented Nora's boots. In the photo, the woman had the careful posture of someone holding breath. It is easier to draw conclusions when people are still. On Monday morning, I went to the Spear building with a notary present in the lobby like a talisman. I requested logs. The manager said the logs would require a legal request. I said I had one in my bag. He read the paper and said he would email within 5 business days. His voice said he wished he worked at a building where people only argued about pet deposits. Meanwhile, my body started to do its own quiet sabotage. My chest did a small rhythm I didn't like when I climbed the ladder to reach a transom window. A doctor in a clinic on a limb put a call disc to my chest and listened. She said the phrase probable PVCs and told me to wear a monitor for 72 hours. I wore it while standing for a client in Wash Park, the strap sticking to my collarbone and making my skin smell like medical tape when I peeled it off at night. The report came back with a recommendation for less caffeine and fewer adrenaline spikes, which I found darkly funny in a week where my life's adrenaline came with timestamps. I wrote Nora a formal letter. I put my name at the top like a person who expects to be misread and wants to minimize the error. I listed actions I had taken: frozen cards, opened a separate account, placed a credit freeze with case numbers, contacted the daycare and insurer, requested building logs. I requested a written list of any accounts where my name had been used and a confirmation that it would be removed. I offered 2 appointments at the Lat 1 Leadstone for DNA testing and wrote that I would pay. I wrote that failure to respond would be treated as refusal. I stayed away from adjectives. I kept to nouns and dates. I dropped the letter off at her station with a receptionist who used to be a barrister and handed out kind smiles like coffee. Nora sent 3 short texts. One asked whether I was happy with this level of cruelty. One said our house had not been a home for anyone for a long time. One said if I pushed, she would make sure every kindness would be reported as an offence. I took screenshots and slid my phone face down under a sanding pad because I needed a layer between my palm and those words. In the middle of all this, my father called. He has lived in Pueblo his whole life and works at a feed store that also sells candy and lottery tickets. He asked if I wanted them or he wasn't using any more. He asked if I had gotten the roof fixed. Then he asked, like a man carrying delicate cargo, if I thought I was in danger of falsely claiming a child who needed protection from somebody else, or if the danger was me getting tied to a life by paperwork and not choice. He said his friend had once had his name put on a cell phone plan for years by a woman he dated. He said unwinding it had felt like trying to get a sock back from a dog. I told him I appreciated the imagery. He laughed. He told me to drink water. I didn't intend to involve Nora's parents, but they invited us to dinner in Littleton and I did not know how to not go. The table had the kind of heavy plates that tell you the people who own them have decided they will outlast the fashion of plates. I ate half a serving of chicken and felt each chew. When there was a pause and the dogs under the table had stopped patrolling for dropped peas, I placed my folder at my side and said I had to talk about something that one day might appear in a courtroom. I laid out dates and receipts. Nora's mother looked at me like a woman looks at a man who brought a calculator to a confession. Her father stared at his hands, the way men from a certain time stare at their hands when their house is too small for what their daughter has gotten herself into. He asked me one question. He asked if I had plans to call CPS. I said I could not make that decision until I knew whose child it was and where the harm had occurred or only paperwork harm. I said my loyalty to the actual child would outweigh my anger at any point. The sentence felt stiff and prefabricated, but it was true. Nora's mother said in a voice that made me remember junior high that I had always been dramatic. It was unfair. It was also a little accurate. 3 days later, the Spear Building emailed the fob logs. There were entries at 7:44 a.m. and 5:21 p.m. on days when Nora's swap showed covered. There was one entry at 2:11 a.m., the night of the Brightwell email. The log showed a second fob issued the day after the lease addendum. The name on the second fob line was the woman from the billing department, whose face stared back at me from my neighbour's market photo if I zoomed in on her shoulder. She had a small crescent moon tattoo at the wrist you'd see only if you looked for it. I told myself not to make that fact into a constellation. People share key fobs for half a dozen reasons, none of them always ugly. I asked myself why the second fob mattered if the first already made me sick. I did not answer myself. The daycare sent a reply email confirming my removal and apologizing for distress. They advised that any custody dispute be handled outside their system. They attached a PDF naming me as removed, a small bureaucratic mercy. I printed it and put it in a new section of the folder labelled with a tab I wrote by hand, Removals. I didn't expect a tab named Removals to feel like a triumph. It did. The lab appointments came and went. Nor did not attend. The technician told me in the voice of someone who does their job too often to have moods about it that they would hold the sample for a week. The week ended. The sample was destroyed. The receipt went into the folder, then as a confession. Friends applied pressure in the kind way friends apply pressure when they want your life to stop hurting because it makes their own chest feel safer. A guy I know through a South Broadway woodworkers meetup told me that if I didn't go scorched earth now, I never would. A woman I've known since college, who has watched me learn how to pull glass from a sash without breaking it, told me to take a breath because kids deserve a world where adults don't make every fight into the last one. The pastor at our tiny church in Baker called to say he was praying for wisdom, which is a sentence that can sound like a day when you are not getting any sleep. I moved out 6 weeks after the Brightwell email. The same day a thunderstorm creased the sky in a way that made our cat hide for an hour and made me worry about the windows at 2 jobs. I rented a 3rd floor walk-up in Capitol Hill above a quiet nail salon whose smell became a part of my clothes. The landlords were a couple who liked to say good morning on purpose. My father brought me the mower and a box of ceramic mugs none of us remembered acquiring. I took the couch from the front room and left the table because the table had our marriage built into its scratches. After the movers left, I stood at the window and watched the trolley of the Cherry Creek path cut between trees, a long, green ribbon that looked like it led away even if it didn't. I could hear the nail salon's fish tank filter through my floorboards. It hummed the same on opinion Tom Wall filters make. I made coffee and wrote case numbers on a yellow legal pad because writing numbers is the scaffolding I keep building when everything else flattens. I do not have a finishing stunt for you where a court decides and acquires things. I do not have a revelation that sets all paperwork on fire and light pours in. I have a folder with tabs that list what I know and what I will not ever get to know unless someone decides to tell me for a reason of their own. I have a credit freeze with 3 pins I could recite if you were with me, and a separate checking account that doesn't show charges from places that make me dizzy. I have a heart monitor in a drawer and a recommended amount of caffeine I ignore once a week because I need a cup strong enough to bite back. If you are a stranger reading this and you lean toward verdicts like furniture against a wall, I would ask you the question I keep asking my ceiling at 1:40 a.m. Would you demand the test now and risk carving a line through a child-safe map of adults? Or would you wait for a court to make your choice while your paycheck bleeds into line items with names you didn't write? If you discovered your name had become a bridge so someone else's life could get over a ravine, would you hold that bridge out of compassion, or pull back because it was built with parts stolen from your house? I see Nora sometimes. Denver is a village in the shape of a city. Once I watched an ambulance screen down Broadway at 2 p.m, and for 2 full blocks I thought it was hers. It wasn't. Another time, I saw her in the parking lot of the co-op, hair up, pushing a cart with a carton of eggs in the baby seat where a child's legs would usually go. She saw me and looked at her keys as if they had asked a question. We walked in opposite directions, which is a sentence that belongs to poetry and also to grocery store aisles. Months later, the Brightwheel app still tried to send me notifications on the old email account I diverted to a folder called Noise. Sometimes I open it. The entries have no names, just timestamps. A note about said replay day. A reminder that Blue Jays needs extra socks. A photo of 30 blue paper birds hanging from a classroom ceiling on fish line. The birds cast shadows like small, uncertain knives against fluorescent light. I keep the very first email in a locked folder within the folder, labelled 519. The thumbnail of the blue and yellow sepia is still there, the silicone straw-angled gesso, the tiny mountain print beneath it daring you to say anything unkind about a cop. Some mornings, too early even for trucks to be rattling down Broadway, I stand at my Capitol Hill window and listen for the fish tank come through the floor. I look at the alley behind the nail salon, where a meter maid slips a bright envelope under windshield and walks away without turning around. The paper glows orange even before sunrise. The car's owner will come out later and explain the ticket to herself or to her partner on speaker. She will hold the slip by one corner like evidence or like a tool. She will decide which. I hold my coffee and stare at that square of colour and imagine I am holding that decision the way she is. The hum of the tank downstairs keeps time. The envelope flutters once in a draft and settles, as if even a warning knows how to be still.